It's all things considered.
On this day, 200 years ago, Rhode Island voted no on the newly written Constitution. Rhode Island was the only state to put the question directly to the people. It held a referendum, and Rhode Islanders, by a margin of 10-1, said they'd stick with the Articles of Confederation. Thank you, a document that left power mainly with the states. It was a big issue. Rhode Islanders were seriously worried that a strong central government could deprive them of the freedoms they'd so recently won.
We may now give away by a vote what it may cost the dying groans of thousands to recover. We may now surrender with a little ink what it may cost seas of blood to regain. This once, I beg you, let me speak with your true voice. Heed the pleas of millions yet unborn. Send me bound to vote no.
A one-man show called Vote No dramatizes the anti-federalist arguments. Author Robert Blecker, a professor at New York Law School, says these arguments were being made in towns throughout our young nation, but nowhere were they made louder or clearer than in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island, sometimes disparagingly called Rogue Island, was a state and originally a colony that prided itself on autonomy and independence. It was, in fact, the first colony to declare its independence and to rid itself of allegiance from King George III. But when it came time for the Constitutional Convention to meet, Rhode Island's position was simply that we already had a constitution. They were, in essence, satisfied with it, or at least the dominant party was. They didn't see the Constitutional Convention as itself warranted or constitutionally based, and they would simply have no part of it.
If this Constitution they offer you be a wise one, then if you accept it, you lay a lasting foundation of happiness for millions yet unborn. But if this new form of government tends to despotism, then if you adopt it, the only remaining asylum for liberty will be shut up. You will be the scorn and scoff of nations. Lisping babes will be taught to curse your name. You will sip sorrow.
In voting no, Rhode Island and other anti-federalists mainly appear to be against three things: slavery, a strong centralized government, and a federal government having broad financial powers.
They found and they feared that the federal government would not only be too powerful, but as you said, financial powers, that would be too expensive.
All governments find a use for as much money as they can raise. Indeed, they demand more. Congress may create a national debt so large as to exceed the ability of this country ever to discharge. I can scarcely contemplate a greater calamity.
Part of the opposition was an opposition of attitude. That is, the feeling that we had fought a revolution in some sense to rid ourselves of a detested central government from afar, but central government nonetheless, and a detested aristocracy. And we had replaced it with something more egalitarian in the Articles of Confederation, where the locus of power was local. And here we were about to substitute and jettison unconstitutionally our first constitution for our next, under which lawyers would prevail. The detestation of lawyers was a detestation of aristocracy, and the prediction of a future aristocracy and a future government somewhat separate from the people, out of control of the people, is one I think that to some degree has come to pass.
Well, they did predict a glittering federal city where the great and the powerful would reside, clearly with no particular concern for those people at a distance who had voted them in.
They also predicted the advent of professional politicians. Recall, we've changed our attitude about that. Initially, the feeling was that politics ought not to be a profession. Congress, under the Articles of Confederation, was a Congress that was constantly subject to recall and also to forced rotation. That is, you could not be a member of the Congress for any more than 3 out of 6 years. In replacing that, what we had done was to erect a system in which a member of the House of Representatives or Senate could be there perpetually, and politics could become a lifetime profession or occupation. And that would separate the people from their government, the governed from the governors. And they feared that.
There is a charm in politics. Persons who enter reluctantly into office become habituated, grow fond of it, and are loath to resign it. Remember, there is to be a federal city, and the inhabitants of it will be the great and the mighty. The executive, Congress, the law courts, gentlemen of fortune and pleasure, with all the suitors, expectants, and dependents. However brilliant this collection may be, if we expect from them any sincere attachment to simple and frugal republicanism, we deceive ourselves.
Rhode Island finally did vote itself into the United States.
Yes, they did.
Very narrow vote.
Yes, 34 to 32.
Why?
Well, sooner or later, the country party, lost control. That is the party that opposed it. Also, there were 12 states that had now ratified. There was an effectively functioning union. There was some movement on the part of Congress and the executive to exclude Rhode Island from any benefits of the union and start taxing it and laying heavy tariffs on it. There was a threat of secession by, I believe, Providence and Newport to leave Rhode Island and try to join the rest of the Union. And also, very importantly, the Bill of Rights was going to be ratified. And that was a primary source of opposition to the Constitution as proposed. Remember, there was no Bill of Rights. Well, they had become convinced that there would be. But I think it was an accumulated feeling that it was time to enter the Union. That is, you can just go it alone so long. And ultimately, Rhode Island considered itself part of the United States. It always did. That is, from a Rhode Island position, you could argue that it alone had remained loyal and that 12 states had seceded from the Union.
Sounds like that's an argument you would make.
Well, don't misconstrue me. I think that on the balance, the Constitution of the United States is a document that is worth revering. I think it's produced a free and powerful nation, and I think it's a great document in world history. However, I think the responsible vote at the time was no. I think it's a document that should not have been ratified in the form that it was ratified, and I think it's a document that does contain defects, and we ought not lose sight of that. And it contains dangers, and we ought not lose sight of that. We shouldn't feel overprotected by it.
Historian and law professor Robert Blecker, author of the dramatic monologue Vote No, with performer Thomas Scholl. Vote No will be performed at Tufts University, Harvard University, Montgomery College, and at the state capitol in Columbia, South Carolina. It's all things considered.